We're recording. So hey guys, I'm here today with Miles, who wrote Escape from Harlem that would be the December edition. How's it going, Miles?
It's going well. I'm excited to talk about the piece. I've never been really interviewed about any of my writing, so it's going to be interesting.
Absolutely. So I guess just to start, Escape from Harlem, there's lots to go on there. It's definitely raw, as you kind of said before, and it's personal and dark and like struggling and I don't know. So if what would you say about the piece, just as the author?
So I think about this a lot. The piece actually kind of came out of a need to articulate an experience my wife and I went through, or I think when I write autobiographical pieces, I don't necessarily strike out to write exactly what happened, because that's not my story to tell. Somebody else may experience it a different way. So I like to write it from my own psychological point of view, what I was going through. So with this piece, I struggled. I have certain set of values that I try to follow, and what I felt while going through this experience of needing to flee an area did not jive with those things. So I was trying to find like the cognitive dissonance, like where that space was and what I needed to kind of address. So what came about from that was a real dark kind of look into like what my actual fears were, what the basis of them were, kind of talking about like those hierarchy of needs. I found that I kind of got stuck on that second one with like security. I wasn't able to provide security for my family, and I needed to address everything that kind of came with it. And so I just sat down. I want to say it'd been about 6 months since we'd moved out of the area, and I finally kind of sat down and said I needed to deal with my feelings on the matter, and that's kind of what just came out.
Absolutely. It's fantastic. And so I guess the key point I picked up on that I thought was really interesting, I mean, in a time where like it's a common story, right? Like this like kind of coming from humble beginnings kind of thing is kind of tropey, the hillbilly elegy selling millions of copies, and it's kind
Right.
of thing. But what you were able to do was you walked you threaded the needle between these two things in a way that I felt was extremely honest, right? Usually it's either these kind of stories either fall in the camp of like, well, I was forced to like leave this like impoverished area or wherever I grew up because like the system is so broken and there's nothing I could do and I had to save myself and it's like not really my fault. Or it's like um I'm like I had like the I took the personal responsibility approach, and I was like deserving of getting out of there, or whatever, or I made the right choices.
Mhm.
But you walk this tightrope of the actual struggle of like what it feels like to like want to stay because like that's where you exist and are from, and the want to improve it or make it better, or just do something, not flee like your own people or where you come from, and this
Right.
like need to, right, like secure that second level of Maslow's hierarchy, right, like of security and of protecting your family and of like taking the personal like the more, almost, it's not selfish, but like putting yourself first over your community. And the way you articulate that struggle, which I think is something that's missing from like this kind of discourse, I'd never read anything like it, so I thought that was really, really interesting. I know that's not really a question, but like, um, do you want to expand on that? Is that the point you're trying to get across? Am
Yeah.
I articulating it correctly?
Well, I don't want to give myself too much credit and perspective. I think it's important to know, like, kind of like, or at least might be more informative to know my own background. I'm Latin American, mixed heritage. I've got some Irish blood in me. I'm mostly Mexican. I grew up in California. To, I kind of feel like I actually represent a rather missing voice from the discourse, in that my name's Miles. My parents' name are Russell and Karen, but I'm of Latino heritage. Like very Americanized. I don't speak Spanish, and it wasn't a choice to not learn Spanish. My parents still don't speak Spanish. I come from a not a strong trend, but there was a very real trend toward divorcing themselves from their heritage. So my grandmother didn't teach my father Spanish because she got her hand slapped in Catholic school when she spoke it. So I have this, I kind of exist in the space of being very essentially American, but not white, and not understanding whether or not, and almost feeling as if I grew up with a kind of what would be described as a white privilege, and then I started to travel the world, and I found that that wasn't the case anymore. So I left California by way of the military. I joined the military. I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years, and that was kind of the first time that I felt I got to experience different parts of American society, different levels of poverty, meeting people from different walks of life that also viewed me differently than I had ever been viewed before. So that's when I really started to kind of form my own identity as someone not as non-white or other in some other people's eyes. So that going on from that, I ended up getting into school at a university in New York City, and I moved to Bed-Stuy. And I talk a little bit about the piece about my time in Bed-Stuy, which was like this almost commercialized gentrification where, and to this day, this is kind of the hardest part for me to talk about Bed-Stuy, because I don't know the reason why I had such a better time at Bed-Stuy. It could be that I was single during that time and I didn't feel like I needed to protect anyone. I didn't have a family unit to care for. And so I could kind of just walk in and about. When someone else left my apartment, I didn't worry about them. They weren't my concern. It was just a roommate. Um, so that could be a possibility. I don't know that, but when I came to Harlem, that change came out of a new job, and I felt I had earned my place living there because I was working within the community, earning for the first time a well-paying, a higher salary, and I felt that I was going, whatever the rent was, like I deserved to live in the area that I worked. That's what I felt, as a brown man, that I felt that taking advantage of the progress that my own parents had made, that I deserved to be there. And what I didn't realize was that there's like a bit of a transaction with gentrification, that people might be asking you to pay more than you should, and that there's a violence in that kind of payment of the. So when it came to a part that actually cut out of Escape from Harlem was like a bit talking about how much rent I was paying, and realizing that that was harmful to the area, whereas before I thought it was just kind of natural. So that's kind of, but I remember feeling a sense of, no, I earned this. I'm not going to walk away from a job or the convenience of living near my job, because I too, as a brown man, am taking advantage of progress built upon by my parents. But as I came to understand it, that paying that rent, that level of rent in that area, was harmful to the people around it that were living around me and were unable to afford the same kind of housing. And that kind of branched off from there in my thought process.
Interesting. So I guess, having never been to Harlem, or a city in which there is like lots of gentrification,
Mm-hmm.
out here, and
Rapid.
I'm from Ohio, so like we're in like the suburban part of Columbus, and it's just mostly like farmland and stuff. But so I don't have a ton of experience with that. So do you want to elaborate on that point of like, so if you were in
Yeah.
Harlem paying higher, like, were you staying in a nicer part of Harlem that was like becoming gentrified, and that's why you're paying more? Or like, what do you mean by like the rent you're paying was harming the people around you?
Well, I think it's important to kind of keep in mind, like, New York is this interesting city in that it's highly televised. It's in all forms of medium. We have very commercialized views of what it is. Like I remember growing up thinking Home Alone 2 was that's New York. That's where I want to live. That's what. And then there's Harlem's got this special place amongst that, right? You've got the Harlem Renaissance, the artistic Black Renaissance, with jazz, art, every form of medium, and that it was a mecca. It was a cultural mecca. And that's what comes out of it. That's what's romanticized out of the area. And there's been efforts that I was probably ignorant to before, to try to rebrand Harlem as this everyone come, everyone welcome. And it's not that everyone isn't welcome. It's that there's still strife there, and it is still generational pain that I was ignorant to. So I enjoy coming to new landscapes and getting to know them. I felt I was able to do that correctly and respectfully in Bed-Stuy and in Bushwick. And then I expected the same out of Harlem and didn't quite respect the fact that there was going to be a different kind of pain to certain areas. What, for the first time we used I kind of came into memes for the first time in my life, and we used an agent to find a place, and it was the first place we saw, and we liked it and thought, hey, this is great. Come to find out that this was actually a special 2-block system, that it's highly suspected that the NYPD was kind of letting open air drug marketing just kind of go on. And there is some benefit to that concept of going on, like giving outlets for certain communities to have certain transactions in a certain place. As it turns out, you don't necessarily want to live there or right on top of it is what I found out. And I have I was in the military. I keep a short haircut still. I light skin. I look like a cop. Like I talk about my own drug addiction. I've had people my own drug dealers who dealt to me for years ask me, "Are you a cop?" I'm like, "I'll let you know, man, if it ever changes, but I'm not a cop." So I stood out, and that's no one's fault. It's not my own fault. It's not anyone who felt uncomfortable around me because of it, but it did cause problems. What I wanted to avoid was the piece becoming number one, an indictment on Harlem or anyone's experience of Harlem, and 2, a list of grievances. And what that was, I had to cut out a lot of basic day-to-day microaggressions that were coming from different members of the community. Like I couldn't take my dog out to use to go use the bathroom without someone asking me, "Why are you letting your dog pee here?" It was the constant little turf wars, and you knew that there was an unwelcomeness to what you were bringing. Why are you? And it was because of the building I was living in, the rent that they knew we were paying. Why were we doing that to the community? And maybe it's not articulated in such a way, but that always seemed to be the foundational basis.
No, absolutely. I think all that comes through, right? Your ability to, exactly what you said, right? It reads in no way like an indictment of Harlem or of the strife, as you say, or struggles that those people are going through or right, at all. And I think that's what a lot of people criticize a lot of this type of writing of usually of doing sometimes, right? To reference back to Hillbilly Elegy, as I mentioned, right? A lot of times that reads to some people as a indictment of the failures of white Appalachian communities and drug addiction and all that and the things they're suffering with. And it's as if right, if only you were better or whatever. It's this indictment. And I totally think you nailed, doesn't read like that at all. So I commend you on that. You mentioned, right, this feeling out of place, right? This inability to truly fit in Harlem. And in the piece you also mentioned, right, you have one foot in both worlds almost, right? Like being light skinned, being mixed, right? Because at the end you mentioned, right, how you have, right, you have the right, I forget the exact wording you used, but it was great, right? You have the right, you have the white wife and she has the high credit score, so you can get the nice apartment in the white gentrified area of New York, and you can move out of Harlem. But at the same time, you want to scrub the melanin out of your last name, right? It's both, right? While you don't fit in Harlem, you also don't fit in Bedlam or wherever you ended up, right? You're constantly the outsider because, and this is a common kind of thing you hear from people who come from mixed race backgrounds and mixed race families is I don't fit anywhere, and I can't be accepted anywhere because I'm too white to live in Harlem, but I'm too dark to live with all the white kids, right? So I, again, not super a question, but do you want to expand on that? What is that like? What is that struggle like? How do you deal with it? What kind of interesting perspective does it give you, if any? Just if you want to riff on that.
Well, I think it's impossible to talk about my real feelings about belonging and also rejection without talking about the drug addiction. I've struggled with drug addiction since leaving the Marine Corps. It's cost me life paths. It's cost, to some degree, I now work for the university that I used to attend, but I dropped out of. So, and that played a part in there. It played a part in mine failing out of paramedic school. There's a bunch of different parts of my life where it's just constantly there. And I think at the time I moved to Harlem, I'd finally gotten this real nice stable job. I'd gotten my life kind of cleaned up to a certain degree. And I identified, there's a lot of street drug users on the area that I lived. And it was hard to feel such an I identified with them, but it must have looked like I was annoyed by them, and that's not the case. I was scared of them because I knew at any moment I could walk out and get drugs. There was a guy standing in front of my stoop selling Rice Krispies, and I'm like, this is gonna be a difficult situation for me, and I have the money to leave. I have the money to go somewhere else. Is that wrong? Am I running for myself in a certain degree? And so, yeah, there is an outsidership to it. There's a lack of belonging. Do I feel more comfortable in the Upper West Side? And now my neighbor is I alluded to it, the Mormon Church. I live next to Central Park. Juilliard's across the street. Unfortunately, yes. Like it would be a lie to say no. It's also better for my mental health to not be around street dealers. But I remember having a very specific argument with we broke our contract with the renter. We were there for a total of 10 weeks. Everything that happened there happened rapid succession. And I remember just being like, feeling conned and angry with the renters for asking for that much money when they know what the environment is there. That's the betrayal. That's kind of like that capitalism, man, is really kind of it's demanding more out of people of wealth that would like to be there, and it's just crushing the people below, or it's at least not opening up the amount of wealth that should be coming from opportunities of employing the people around it to do so. So it's an ever shifting, complicated landscape about like my emotional feelings about the experience. But and again, like even like the reason why that piece it kind of shifts around. It goes with that second person narrative to first person narrative, and it was the first time that I wrote something in the voice that I wanted. I tend to write poetry, but I also like to write prose, and this was the first time I kind of let those two forms blend. And it was because that piece was the first time that I was like, I'm just going to write how I feel in the cadence that I feel it of, and it's going to be shifting, and it is constantly shifting for myself even to this day.
Absolutely. It's super interesting. I guess my follow-up, and I know you've kind of touched on this before and maybe you've answered it, but what was the driving factor that, like, what drove you to want to move to Harlem in the first place?
Yeah, so that I thought I was cool. I thought I was too cool for the safety of like the high tower kind of Manhattan. I thought I was, I was meant for the seedier things, and I guess that in a way like really betrays kind of an implicit bias. I thought that there was more attitude to the area, but with sense of safety, and that's kind of where I describe it, like that's what I experience in Bed-Stuy. Like I have a list of crazy stories of crazy things I went through Bed-Stuy, but it always felt just a little bit distant enough to remain safe. And when I went to Harlem, it was just in your face, and to a way that like I deeply respect. I still work in Harlem, and I still understand it and identify with a lot of the issues that are going on there. And a lot of people that I meet who know a different kind of Harlem or have had different experiences, there have been times where I try to reflect, probably poorly, my experiences. They think they probably get that. That's what I feared, was the indictment. I never want somebody to feel like I'm indicting the area. And they'll always explain to me like, oh, you didn't go here, or I haven't experienced that at all. And I want to allow them. That's a very valid experience. That doesn't make it wrong. I don't think that Harlem did anything wrong. I think I went about it poorly. I didn't get to know the area before going in. I didn't know the violence that the money I was paying for rent would kind of like wreck. And nor did I take really good stock of myself and what my needs are to remain safe, as far as kind of staying sober in certain ways. So again, like this was more of an introspective piece and less on a societal, but it it definitely stings a little bit to find that you're kind of like part of that I don't want to call it upper class. That's not what this area is, but safer. Using taking advantage of that privilege. Do I take a little bit of solace in the fact that like my last name is still Mendoza, and that I think that I'm kind of generationally kind of earning that kind of uptick. Sure, but yeah, it does sting a little bit.
Sure, absolutely right. It's this it's tropey, right? Like there's the trope of the like person
Mhm.
who is like the person who's born in the inner city or like whatever has the privilege to leave and at the first jump they leave and like that's kind of
Right.
it's a huge problem for these communities, right? And like all the would be role models and the ability to like bring wealth into these communities and people that like are earning wealth are instead of staying and building the community are leaving and like it must be right it has to be difficult to like want to subvert that kind of trope and like be the one who stays and like brings the and like works and builds their family in the place that like they're from and or whatever, right? And then be like find that just by sheer like it's like circumstance, right? Like it's too like dangerous and you have to look out for your family and you have to look out for your own mental health and drug addiction and all of that, right? It must be terribly difficult to deal with. And it has to be something that's common, right, among all these kinds of people that like find themselves unable to stay for like their own set of personal reasons. So,
Mhm.
and I know you're focusing a lot on the introspective aspect, and you're not making societal claims, but like, if you would, what do you think the answer is to these kinds of like generational problems and like the fleeing of the inner cities by the people that are able to make it out and like do you have systemic answers if you were king for a day, if you could wave a magic wand?
Oh man, that is a tough question. I mean, yeah, I think we've all been thinking about these questions, especially this past year with the demonstrations that have been going on. It's interesting to me. There's always going to be this dance between um, social programs and then lack of social programs and crime. And so I king for a day, I absolutely just be changing budgets and throwing money into social programs because there is so much going on in the street that is just comes down to mental health issues, just needing the right programs to get someone on the route of whether it be sobriety or employment. um, Instead we're just policing them, and I work with cops daily, to be quite honest with you, and I understand that I understand their immediate um issues. They're dealing with the now, and that's kind of where I found myself dealing with the now. Like, yeah, this is where I stand on a social change, but like this is what's happening to my wife right this second that she went out the door that I need to answer with right now. So my thing is like we're wasting too much time not starting these social programs, not giving as much money we can into these communities through whether it be through government programs or what have you to help change that the less fortunate on bottom end of it. So it's got to be natural, right? Not enough people are employed by the massively well endowed financially institutions in the area. And they need to be hired directly from the area, and they're as the area continues to get developed, the wages need to be higher as well. Someone should be able to live in the area they work. That's what I truly believe in. People should be hired in the area that the jobs are coming from. And so I think if we move towards those kind of policies, we'll see a lot of giant change. Instead, where you've got the suspicion of police not responding to as many calls as they are as a kind of like a silent protest from their end in the area, and that led to a large uptick of violence this past summer. But it, I think the answer is meeting those issues with social support and programs first and foremost and immediately. And I'm just talking like just radical amounts of money going into that. And I think that's where we see a lot of real systemic change come from.
Yeah, I liked a lot of what you said, and I think latching on to like the focus on jobs and housing and building infrastructure in these communities, I think is something that like I don't know. It seems that the idea of social programs has, in my opinion, like stultified in that like we haven't really rethought how our social programs function on a like systemic
Right.
level since like the 70s or like the introduction of like a true trying to actually build like a true social democratic welfare state under like LBJ and like the war on poverty. And now the only conversations are like, do we increase food stamps or decrease food stamps or increase Medicare or
Right.
what, without really thinking about like, can we rethink the policies as a whole, right? Like, can we rethink like how we're spending this money? How do we do it so that it's like building true infrastructure in these communities? I thought that was like very interesting. Uh, would you agree? Like, I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, what do you think about the like seeming failures of the way in which the welfare state was instituted in like the 70s under like the war on poverty and like these kinds of things, and like how it's like seems to have failed to put any dent in like actually helping like these communities or like actually reducing poverty at all?
That's a good question. I think when you see programs that are trying to address a person as a whole, not just money for food, but do you have a job? Do you have a stable, safe place to live? Do you have other mental health issues? That you see that those are what lead to long lasting change in an individual, and that's what is going to lend itself to a better happier, more healthy community. But at the same time, it's like I love it when those ideas come from the community itself. I hate being a visitor into the community, like how can I help these people? And when there's so many activists that are like, I've got the ideas. I like, well, we can ask us, we'll let you know. Um, yeah, that is a very tough question that I wish I had a better answer for.
I don't think.
But I feel like go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying. I don't think anyone has a silver bullet answer to like these kinds of systemic problems. So I wouldn't
The
feel.
question is like, why aren't we having the conversations more about that? Where's the
Sure.
research about like what kind of social program? Why are we afraid to have those? People want to argue for less money for food stamps. It keeps them on a kind of addicted to it in a certain way, addicted to welfare. We hear about addictions to welfare. We hear about the overblown ideas of the welfare queens and things like that. We allow them to be fear mongered instead of realizing like what a horrible, even if you could prove the existence of something like a welfare queen, like that sounds like a horrible existence even at the end. So you want to, and then you see entrepreneurship. I think like I think that's probably a strong idea. It'd be more government programs trying to support entrepreneurship. Too many businesses fold, start up, and by people born in the area that are chosen to stay in the area, and they venture out to actually add to the community, and then like most New York businesses, restaurants, everything they close like the snap of a hat. And now you throw COVID into the mix, and it's like it's a house of cards that's ready to fall even further.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, neither of us are PhD social scientists or looking at research or talking to activists on the ground, like about what to do in these communities. But I think that's like, I think you make the exact right
But
point.
if only, right?
Right. I think you make the exact right point, which is like the real issue is that like the conversation is so stultified, right? It's so like mundane and boring almost, right? Like the conversation is always like the like right if you're a right winger and you look at it and you're like, see, these social programs aren't helping, we're just wasting money. And if you're on the left wing and you think like we do need to be investing in social programs, it's never about like, let's meet the community where they're at, let's figure out like, let's rethink these programs, let's make them better, let's improve them, let's do different things. It's always like well, we can allocate 10 more million dollars this year to food stamps, or we can increase the like whatever, right? Like we can increase like unemployment insurance, or whatever, right? But like there's no like deep rethinking or creativity in the policy debate, which I think is sorely lacking and could actually lead to actual like change and benefit in these communities. But that's my own personal hill to die on, I guess.
No, no, no. I mean, absolutely not. It sounds like something you could rile people up about. It's, I think what's interesting is, I grew up in such a safe suburban neighborhood atmosphere, and I remember being in Harlem and seeing some of the things that I saw on a daily basis, just kind of like becoming the backdrop and thinking about what it would be like to raise a child there, or to be a child more specifically, and and realizing that just how hard is it to go home into a to government provided housing, and I was an EMT, so I actually went into these buildings a lot in emergency situations, and you smell urine and drugs, and it's like, how's a kid supposed to come home and do his homework in that environment? And it's, I don't think I've been in an elevator in the projects that didn't have urine in it. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's about, you talk about more about social programs. It's just like, does it even have to be a social program, or can we just put a ton of money into education, and bolstering that kind of infrastructure that should be there for all? They're not getting the same opportunities that I got in Sunnyvale, California, growing up. Not as many after school programs to continue education, or to strengthen interest in certain talents. So there's probably a lot of people that grew up kind of hardened by the fire of growing up in certain areas, that have a ton of ideas about how to make it better. And there I was doing like almost the reverse of like the hillbilly elegy, right? Like, I was coming in from the outside, and we're like, hey, sounds like you guys got something that, looked great on TV. I would love to be a part of it. And then found out that, I just got my ass kicked. And rightfully so. I think most of the time I kind of come out of it, like, yeah, I kind of deserved that. I kind of needed that kind of kick in the face to really kind of get a more accurate perspective of everything. I remember moving into my apartment. I was excited, and I'm telling my coworkers when I'm moving, and they're like, "You're not from here, right?" And they're like, "Yeah, I've been here for a few years though. I know about New York City." And they're like, "No, but you're not from here, and you're about to find out." And they were right.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Like I don't know if this is unique to writers, or maybe it's just a thing that kind of everyone does, but like this like almost want to experience like the want to like shirk your like own privilege in a way, right? Like your own safety, your own security, to like experience what like true like real life is like, almost, right? Like real struggle or real hardship, or really know what it's like. And like I don't know, you see it, right? You see it with like that's like I guess to like tie it to writing, right? Like that's like the like archetypal writer, right? Like the guy who suffers and goes to war or whatever, or comes from these hard backgrounds, or Robert Bolaño, right?
Toxic
Like
masculinity, like, to the teeth. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. I mean, hey,
exactly.
like those thoughts definitely come up. Like when I was making life decisions, I was like, I've got to become an interesting, dark, brooding man. So like a jet flew by my window, and I thought, oh yeah, military, cool. 2 seconds, like 2 days later, I was signed up, and I was like, all right, you got to have like a dark past, and then you got to go live in a cool city, and you think about how many writers are trust fund kids. Like Burroughs. Burroughs didn't have to work for a living. But he just threw himself in the drug addiction just because, and to explore that area and kind of entrench themselves, bringing probably a pretty narrow perspective to some degree of like being privileged and educated, because that's what writing used to be a sign of, right? Of having had access to education. And then and what do? They bring back a little pocket of strife back for the masses to kind of read and understand, as opposed to being a voice of that area, from the area. And that's newer. I think that that's newer and probably more interesting to a lot of people. And also, while as America becomes more literate, hopefully it continues that trend, we, you know, being able to read those voices and understand them and get, bring up hillbilly elegy, that kind of style of like experiencing another world, but from its perspective, not going into it and grabbing it.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
I think I've learned that like that's what I want my writing to be. I'm like just talking about my real experiences and not trying to adopt a certain archetype of writer, like you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly right. Like everyone, like anyone who's like a young like wannabe writer, right? Like dreams of doing something like that. But I think like what you learn is there's no great writer that did it like, well, there's very few that did it on purpose, right? Like it was like that was their life. They didn't choose for like to like have a horrific past, right?
Right,
Dostoevsky didn't like choose to get arrested and almost killed, right? Like they didn't
right.
they didn't choose this life. It just was, and like that led them to writing about it. And like you kind of have to write about like whatever life throws at you if like your goal is to be a writer. And I don't know, personally I think basically everyone has something interesting to say if they like want to write. Like it's okay, like
Right.
there's like interesting stuff you can talk about like even if you're privileged and you don't have a lot of strife, that's interesting, right? It can be interesting to write about like the want for strife in your life, the want for struggle. Like that's a strange new kind of phenomenon for like only a very small number of very modern kind of Western people. And like that's a very weird kind of human struggle that like a lot of people can relate to and
Right
that
in
like we kind of
itself,
have to
yeah.
grapple with. Yeah. So
Yeah.
um any brooding writers out there, it's probably not worth it to um throw
Yeah,
your
don't
life
seek it
away.
out.
And yeah.
Don't seek it out. As someone who like I made a very conscious decision. I was like, well, let's just start getting like, where's the interesting stuff come from? Like war, cool. Let's get into it. And it's so, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not voyeuristic. It's transient. You know, like it's so like I'm here to learn. Oh, and then you just like, oh shit, this is real. And you know, and I've had a lot of struggles that were birthed out of very long term decisions made in a flash of an instant. And you know, I think actually a lot of my writing tries to almost therapeutically inject playfulness into it. This was probably my most straightforward. This is what happened kind of story. Usually, like for instance, I was just writing about my first divorce in the military, and I like decided a pirate ghost needed to be involved. You know, like so I like a little bit of a magical realism because it gives a little bit of levity and distance from the real pain of some of these subjects. And I didn't want to do that with Escape from Harlem. I think the most I will let myself kind of get there was talking about trying to paint that kind of like breezy picture of Manhattan, you know. But I really wanted to stay with this is what really happened. These were the things that were occurring and that were occurring so fast that it kind of became like a whirlwind of a hard lesson learned.
Absolutely right. It's an interesting choice that like writers kind of have to make, right? Especially with style like that. Right, like something like 100 Years of Solitude that's like deeply magical realism, and
Favorite
there's a
book.
lot of yeah, I love that book. There's a lot of levity and a lot of like truly funny parts and silly parts and like absurdism, but like it's all kind of like right, kind of putting a distance between how much true like pain there is in this like
Right.
cyclical nature of like South American life and these cultures that like try so hard to get out of these cycles and they're just stuck and stuck and stuck until they um disappear. Hopefully that wasn't a spoiler to anyone who hasn't read the book, but
Still read it.
yeah, you should. It's like amazing, but right,
It's
but
hard to spoil that book because I feel like every sentence can like bring you a whole new anecdote and world unto itself. And don't worry about it. You guys are gonna enjoy it.
yeah, it's yeah, I highly recommend it, right? But sometimes it's necessary, and sometimes it's better to kind of strip that away and just really punch, like aim
Yeah.
for the gut, just like gut punch someone, and just like you're gonna have to take it, and there's no levity, there's no like niceness. The only thing I can think about right now is The Road, which is different and like kind
Hmm.
of dark for dark's sake, but that's it. Like there's no Cormac McCarthy doesn't know how to add levity to his stories, right? Like it's always
No,
a
yeah, he's not gonna throw you a life vest in that kind of like those dark waters. Like Cormac McCarthy, I it's funny. I actually think of Cormac McCarthy and Gilbo Garcia Marquez when I write a lot, because you have one who adds in this kind of like this magical veil to everything. It's like everything's through that certain lens, and it's beautiful, and it's heart tearing at the same time. But then you have Cormac McCarthy, and he's like, I'm not going to waste a single sentence on anything that isn't absolutely horrible. You ready? And I love that too. And it's both speak to a certain truth, because one speaks to how you're experiencing things, and another one is experiencing, this is the world. It's chaotic and it's dark, and both are true. Both are true. You have to experience yourself, and you also have to experience the world as it is.
Absolutely. To just tie it back to the piece, the other thing I was really interested in asking you, so you speak about drug addiction, and you also spoke about how that like kind of colors your entire, it has to color the entire story and kind of your entire identity, because like how could it not, right? It's like a huge part of you. I guess like, what is it like, as like drug addiction is a huge, like obviously one of the hugest part of the problems like that like inner city communities face is drugs and drug addiction, and like people suffering from drug addiction. So as someone who's experienced that and struggled with that and fought through that, do you have any advice like from the experience? What do we do? How do we rethink how we treat drugs, especially in these communities, or just in the world in general? Or do you have any advice or anything you'd like
Yeah,
to say?
100% decriminalization. Like, I'm just like, decriminalize, legalize. I think Eric Andre just had a piece called, did a bit called Legalize Everything, and it just stuck with me. It was like, legalize everything. So what I've got the rich drug addiction. I liked cocaine, and what I found in Bed-Stuy was that you could text someone and have it show up in your in a car delivery system, Uber style, and that was cool and safe, and I got what I wanted at a moment's notice. And then when I came to Harlem, I found out that there was another side to that. There was street begging, and there was, $5 bags of crack. There was a different kind of like an uglier side, and then there's also the thing that I literally never worried about, and still have never worried about now, even talking about, is prosecution. That is something that existed in that community that had never existed for me. I was never going to get in trouble. That it would be, I would have to really screw up and try to get in trouble for my drug addiction to become a legal problem for me. That is not true in Harlem. That is not true for a lot of people who have had very different means than me. And that's when I kind of talked about, like, hey, I will go and demonstrate. I will scrub the melanin right out of my last name for you with my white girlfriend and her high. I had those means, and maybe I kind of married into them, but there are a lot of people who are saddled with the views that society has on that kind of addiction. That's a dirtier, guiltier, you did this to yourself kind of addiction. Not a, hey, he's a good kid, he served in the military, he's going to school, and he just likes to party kind of. We view all these things differently, but at the same time, it's the same illness. It's the same struggle. It's the, people searching escapism, whether or not they're genetically disposed to it, or if they're just in need of escape, and they're trying to escape their circumstances. And I remember a night where I bought drugs in Harlem, and it was very late, and I was asking someone who's begging me for money where I could find drugs, and he said, it'll be easy tonight. Tonight it's gonna rain tomorrow, and no one's gonna be out in the street. And I just thought, I was like, I don't know this life. I shouldn't be here. I don't know how to properly and be a part of it, and not be deeply changed by it. While at the same time, um, I don't, yeah, that was like a strong moment for me, I guess, that I realized that, it, that there was more pain going on in this part of the community than I'd realized before.
It, right, like we kind of all, I think, at least like as the war on drugs kind of fails and winds down, and marijuana becomes legalized across the country, and more people become like more aware and think more deeply about like how we treat drugs in this country, and why we criminalize them the way we did, and the all that, like I think people are becoming more and more aware of this like kind of bifurcation in drug culture almost, right? Like, and there's, it's probably more than two, right? Like every kind of community and area and state has like very different ways in which drugs are treated, right? Like me growing up in a suburb
Right.
of Ohio, right? Like I had friends that got pulled over with like ounces of marijuana in the car, and like what they called their parents, and they like had a court date and their parents showed up, and the judge was like, oh, we don't want to ruin your whole life by like giving you a record, so like here's some community service and we'll scrub it off your record and you still get to go to college and you don't lose your scholarships, and like, and that like that was normal. No one was actually like, obviously like what, we're running around, we're 17, we're smoking a little marijuana, like it's normal. No one's actually afraid of like, yeah, of course everyone's afraid of the cops, we don't want to get pulled over, we don't like get in trouble, but it's not like we're afraid for like our futures. No one like actually thinks like, oh, I might
Right.
end up in prison, I might end up in juvie, I might end up like losing my entire life, derailing my entire life because of this. Like there's not a true fear of that, right? And then obviously it's a completely other world in Harlem or in Compton or in these like inner cities or in West Side Chicago, right? Like you get picked up with, I don't know, right? Like half a gram of marijuana and you get 3-strike rule or whatever, and you get, there's minimum sentences and you end up in prison, and your life is just over, right? Like it's not over, but like your entire path is completely changed, right? Like
Right.
there's no returning to that original path before you got arrested. Anyway, that's way too long of a soliloquy. I just like, it's interesting that you're pointing to this, that you have direct experience with experiencing both cultures of how drugs
Right.
are treated, and the way they influence communities. Do you have anything else to say on that? I know I was kind
Yeah,
of
no, no,
rambling
no,
there.
no. I think that's actually a really good point, and it actually brings up a interesting situation, because what you're talking about is a judge looking at maybe you or your friend and being like, "Oh, I see a future here," and that's not happening in other communities. And I used to think about, I think one of the most prominent things why I started my story off talk like kind of in media res of like talking like seeing a man passed out on my stoop. It was because I always felt two bad moves. I always call it like two bad nights or two bad decisions away from being that. I know that I could go both ways. At the same time, I also know that if I ever got in real trouble, I know how to write up my career and be like, look, I'm a performing member of the community and I have potential. I know I can speak with a certain kind of eloquence, and due to my education and due to my upbringing, and I can wear a suit and my short haircut. Whereas, there's culturally like people who've been deprived of that ability to kind of bring that, if performing the same transaction against society, I guess, if you want to call drug use that, and not being able to bring um, that kind of appearance of future opportunity to the community, and then they're just absolutely demonized for it. So yeah, I mean, it's probably the most important part of the what's the word I'm looking for, disparity between the two worlds, right?
Sure. Yeah, and it's I mean, trying to play devil's advocate here, it's hard for me to possibly look out and kind of defend our current culture, the way we treat drugs, the way we act them. Like it's right. We've been, what humans have existed for thousands and thousands of years. There's never been a human civilization that hasn't experimented with mind altering substances. It's part of who we are. And only in the last 100 years have we decided that like this is not okay. And only some of them, whatever. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm glad to. It's good that the conversation is at least trending in the right direction, right? We're not sitting in the Nixon or the Reagan era where like, oh, like if you even touch marijuana, you're gonna go crazy and your brain's gonna melt and it doesn't make any
Right.
sense and whatever. So I'm glad that the conversation is trending in the right direction. I guess on the personal level, um, do you have any personal advice or thoughts on what it's like struggling on an individual level with addiction to something, with like true debilitating addiction to like a really hard substance, right? Like it's not like, oh, I have a couple drinks or smoke a little marijuana. It's like right? Like I have a Coke
Right.
addiction
Yeah.
or whatever.
If you're losing work over your drug addiction, it's time to do something. I'm not. I think the thing that scared me away from trying to dealing with my drug addiction was like, oh, the fun's over. The fun's over. Like, the good times are over. I wasn't even having a good time anymore. Like it was causing so many problems in my life. And, kind of understand that the views on addiction and addiction treatment have changed. There is a new world of what we call harm reduction. Not necessarily you got to go to group, and you got to find a sponsor, and you got to be ready to never do anything of any kind again. There's more wholesome, full what's the word I'm looking for? Like full-minded approaches that are going on now. I'm not going to claim absolute sobriety right now. I've just found something that works better for me as a human. I've heard that in the UK, like the idea of abstinence from substance abuse isn't even really a goal in their treatment programs, because it's just part of, like, drinking per se is like just such a part of European culture that it's just it's certainly unattainable for a lot of people. And I remember thinking, and we do that as Americans now. Drinking and even drug use has become such a popular and almost friendly experience, depending on what kind of like media you're taking in. So, I haven't seen anyone balk at a drug coming out at a regular social occasion in a long time. There's this social acceptance, and that's really always been there. We demonize drugs and drinking on in certain media, and then we glamorize it in the next show. And it really affects how we think about it. But if you're someone that is truly finding these things are costing you in your life, search out the kind of therapy that's right for you. Don't settle for anyone that isn't, and understand that the fun's not over. There's a lot of good still to be had, and that there are different ways than you probably have been told about a drug addiction or drug treatment that could be better for you. And that's what I found, through one-on-one therapy and pain reduction. I'm sorry, harm reduction, that I've been able to kind of find a new happy medium that works for me and that allows me to remain happily employed, happily married, and productive, even more productive than my writing than I used to be.
I think that's great advice. I'd like to touch on this. I don't know. I think you made a really interesting point about kind of like we have this very weird, especially like media relationship with drugs, right? Like you're watching a TV show or whatever. No one probably watches TV anymore. Netflix, whatever. Right, you get a PSA about like the dangers of smoking, and you see the crazy like scary commercials with the ladies like whose like fingers are falling off or like throat doesn't work anymore or whatever. And then the show comes on and it's Mad Men, and you're like watching these like cool 50s businessmen smoke cigarettes, and it's like cool, and they just had sex with their wife and now they're smoking in bed, and it's like really cool, right? It's this glorification
Yes,
of the same thing that just was like demonized, right? So we definitely have this very like like there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in the way we treat and talk and act about drugs, especially in media culture. I think that was like a really interesting point. I don't think I've ever really thought about that before. So do you have any more to say about that, or was that just a passing thought, or what do you think that means for us?
Movies and TV are probably like my worst triggers for feeling like because it looks so cool. Everyone's so cool. Everyone's doing cocaine and then going about their day and like doing business meetings. And I'm just like, I'm doing cocaine. I'm like, hi guys, I'm gonna leave and disappear for a day. I'm not operable. I'm not Mr. Cool when I'm on drugs or when I'm drinking too much. But everyone always is able to just drink bourbon and go about their day. And and I think yeah, I'm not calling for realism yet either, because like with that, it is to a certain level of escape. There's kind of a hyper reality that we need out of it. But I do think there are probably more responsible ways of going. Like I think of High Maintenance as like a really great show that kind of explores the way that the universality of the marijuana in our culture, whether or not it's legal, is like, you know, these are the people that use it and these are their stories. And it doesn't really, I think marijuana almost always is only kind of used as this bonding experience in the show, right? Like whenever anyone's using it, it's just like, oh, let's relax and just kind of decompress. And I think that's probably a more healthy way to talk about something. Whereas like I watch Secession and then they're just like, you know, Secession isn't horrible because they do talk about like the mania of like cocaine addiction within that show, but it's like, I'm not making any business deals. I could barely order a pizza when I'm on cocaine. So, you know, not that I would want to, but yeah, it is, there's a dichotomy to it, and it's probably not as healthy as it could be. But I think we have to, you know, like you mentioned Mad Men, it's very true, but it's also like, that's a romanticized way we look at history, right? And that actually that specific era, that's the best time America, you know, but it's also untrue. You know, it's also only if you ignore another half of the world. And that's probably true on an individual level for each character. Like, you know, I think that's what Mad Men tried to do, right? Is try to show like what a mess of lives would be if you really bought in on that.
Absolutely. So we're running close to an hour, so I will let you go soon, but I do have to ask you the cliche of all interview cliche questions for writers, which is, if you're talking to someone who just loves to read, or maybe you're talking to someone who is interested in writing, what books would you recommend? 3, 5, 20, however many you would like?
Yeah, so I you know, it's funny. The Void actually found me while writing about like a horror story. So like I write like a huge gamut of things, and that's because my influences are. So I mean, you know, I'll grab this one. Like if you're a science fiction reader, I got Hyperion for you, which I'd never heard of this before, and it might be one of the best science fictions ever written.
It's super underread. I only know it because like my friend found it and recommended it to me, and I had never heard of it before, and it's fantastic.
Oh, it's like
so good.
It is amazing, and I also love short stories, and that's a perfect blend of that. You know, like
yeah,
just
absolutely.
Like if you, I can't recommend that enough. Also, we were talking about 100 Years of Solitude. That book changed my life in a lot of ways. My grandmother was an English teacher, so we studied that together over a summer of like independent study. So that was a big one for me. I'm sure I'm going to think about every book that I want to recommend after this is done. But you know, I'm trying to think. You know, lately I've been really getting into Bukowski. Just kind of like, and that's me kind of dealing with the certain current subjects that I'm writing about. So also I'm like, I consider myself like a blue collar poet. So like I'm working like a lot, and I was sometimes 16-hour days, and I'm writing poems like in my breaks or whatever quiet moments I can find. And I find a certain amount of solace in reading someone like Bukowski, who wrote like Post Office, which is just about being ground up by your job, and just you know, wanting to make it home to a woman and a drink, and writing about the kind of pain in just the day-to-day existence. And so I love that kind of stuff. So yeah, if you've never read Bukowski's Post Office, would definitely recommend that. Very quick book, very, very breezy read. Let's see. I've got all these books on my thing, but I don't want to cheat and just start grabbing them.
It's a surprisingly difficult question. Like it really does seem to put you on the spot if you haven't thought about it. There's just so many options.
It's like somebody asked me my favorite movie. I'm like,
yeah. But I think all three of those are great. Huge fan of 100 Years of Solitude. Obviously, we talked about that. Huge fan of Hyperion. I personally have never read any Bukowski, but I will add it to my ever-growing list of things to read. On your recommendation.
Yeah. Bukowski before Burroughs, I would definitely say. I would definitely recommend reading. I always feel like they get like put together to a certain degree, but
gotcha.
Definitely would recommend it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Miles. It was great. I really hope we'll have you back on. It's super interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, man. Really nice meeting you.
See you guys.